I'm here. This power. Nah, just kidding. I'm not actually an anime villain. This is a tape measure. It's tape that you measure with. This was a pencil. Now it's gone. This is a mug. You put liquids in the mug and transport those liquids from one place to another. Most often from some sort of surface into your mouth. This is the eye. You throw it to generate a random number between 1 and 6 on this die, as there are 6 sides. I've thrown it and generated a 5. Once again, another 5. Another 5. Another 5. I don't believe this. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. The joke would probably be funny. You should peel a pomegranate sometimes. It takes forever and very messy, but pretty satisfying. All right, we'll do a peeling fruit stream sometime. We'll peel fruit, different fruits and vegetables, and we'll peel them and show people the best way to peel them. It's a pretty good stream idea, since I don't know the best way to peel a pomegranate. Hello, Julie Des. Wait a minute. Your name used to be Julie Deserti or something. Now it's Julie Des. July. Oh, you want to go down? Bye, kitty. Goodbye. Keep in mind, that's what happens. Well, July Deserti. Haha, my surname. Well, Deserti. Remember that, here's a bookmark here. It says, your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Apparently, Ruth says that. Julietta. That's a good name. Julie. I still don't speak any Spanish or Portuguese, unfortunately. But I do speak English, and I hope to speak a little English tonight. I want to get a little bit more sense and sensibility in. One day, Julie, I'll learn Portuguese, or something or other. One day I'll learn. That day's not today. I never learn. Well, let's jump right into it, eh? Chapter 26. I'll grab my book. Yes, read along and correct me on all my horrible speaking mistakes I make. Last time we left off with Marianne and what's her name? Eleanor? Marianne and Eleanor heading off to the city. They tried to get out of it. Mrs. Jennings invited them along. They tried to get out of it, weasel their way out of having to hang out with Mrs. Jennings for who knows how long. But Mrs. Jennings will not be denied. And we're probably going to meet with Willoughby and maybe Colonel Brandon here. So, since everybody else ran off to the city, the main girls have to run off to the city too. And I've said this on every stream so far, but every country novel has to have a city section and every city novel has to have a country section. We'll see if that rule holds true as we continue through the readery here, as the readery stays open. But that's a simple rule of of at least English novels, especially from this time period up through the Victorian era. 16 or 26? 26. Chapter 26, the one that begins Eleanor could not find herself in the carriage with Mrs. Jennings. We start off. I think Eleanor, Marianne really wanted to go to the city, but Eleanor, she wanted to run away. She did not want to go. She looked for any excuse. My hair's a little messed up. Just got back from the gym. Um, let's begin. Chapter 26. Eleanor could not find herself in the carriage with Mrs. Jennings, and beginning a journey to London under her protection and as her guest, without wondering at her own situation. So short had their acquaintance with that lady been, so wholly unsuited were they in age and disposition, and so many had been her objections against such a measure only a few days before. But these objections had all, with that happy ardor of youth which Marianne and her mother equally shared, been overcome or overlooked, and Eleanor, in spite of every occasional doubt of Willoughby's constancy, could not witness the rapture of delightful expectation which filled the whole soul and beamed in the eyes of Marianne without feeling how blank was her own prospect, how cheerless her own state of mind in the comparison, and how gladly she would engage in the solicitude of Marianne's situation to have the same animating object in view, the same possibility of hope. Ah, yes. Last time also Eleanor's supposed beloved uh, bearers had it had been revealed to Eleanor that he is engaged. She considers the engagement a farce, but it kind of seems like it's just hope, just hopeful thinking on her part, wishful thinking. A short, a very short time, however, must now decide what Willoughby's intentions were. In all probability, he was already in town. Marianne's eagerness to be gone declared her dependence on finding him there, and Eleanor was resolved not only upon gaining every new light as to his character which her own observation or the intelligence of others could give her, but likewise upon watching his behavior to her sister with such zealous attention as to ascertain what he was and what he meant. Before many meetings had taken place, should the result of her observations be unfavorable, she was determined at all events to open the eyes of her sister should it be otherwise. Her intentions be of a different nature, she must then learn to avoid every selfish comparison and banish every regret which might lessen her satisfaction in the happiness of Marianne. Hi, Dangles. They were 3 days on their journey, and Marianne's behavior as they traveled was a happy specimen of what her future complacence and companion companionableness companionableness, wow, to Mrs. Jennings might be expected to be. She sat in silence almost all the way, wrapped in her own meditations, and scarcely ever voluntarily speaking, except when any object of picturesque beauty within their view drew from her an exclamation of delight, excessively addressed to her sister. Exclusively addressed to her sister. Poor Mrs. Jennings. To atone for this conduct, therefore, Eleanor took immediate possession of the post of civility which she had assigned herself, behaved with the greatest attention to Mrs. Jennings, talked with her, laughed with her, and listened to her whenever she could, and Mrs. Jennings on her side treated them both with all possible kindness and solicitous, so, solicitous on every occasion for their ease and enjoyment. Oh. The only and only disturbed that she could not make them choose their own dinners at the inn, nor extort a confession of their preferring salmon to cod, or boiled fowls to veal cutlets. They reached town by 3 o'clock the third day, glad to be released after such a journey from the confinements of a carriage, and ready to enjoy all the luxury of a good fire. The house was handsome and handsomely fitted up, and the young ladies were immediately put in possession of a very comfortable apartment. It had been formerly it had formerly been Charlotte's, and over the mantelpiece still hung a landscape in colored silks of her performance, in proof of her having spent 7 years at a great school in town to some effort. As dinner was not to be ready in less than 2 hours from their arrival, Eleanor determined to employ the interval in writing to her mother, and sat down for that purpose. In a few moments, Marianne did the same. I am writing home, Marianne, said Eleanor. Had not you better defer your letter for a day or two? I am not going to write my mother, replied Marianne hastily, as if wishing to avoid any further inquiry. Eleanor said no more. It immediately struck her that she must then be writing to Willoughby, and the conclusion which as instantly followed was that however mysteriously they might wish to conduct the affair, they must be engaged. If somebody writes to you, you're engaged to them. You wouldn't write to somebody you're not engaged. This conviction, though not entirely satisfactory, gave her pleasure, and she continued her letter with greater alacrity. Marianne's was finished in a very few minutes. In length, it could be no more than a note. It was then folded up, sealed, and directed with eager rapidity. Eleanor thought she could distinguish a large W in the direction, and no sooner was it complete than Marianne, ringing the bell, requested the footman who answered it to get that letter conveyed for her to the twopenny post. This decided the matter at once. Her spirits still continued very high, but there was a flutter in them which prevented their giving much pleasure to her sister, and this agitation increased as the evening drew on. She could scarcely eat any dinner, and when they afterwards returned to the drawing room, seemed anxiously listening to the sound of every carriage. Hello, Angel Cake, 36. Welcome to the Readery. It was a great satisfaction to Eleanor that Mrs. Jennings, by being much engaged in her own room, could see little of what was passing. The tea things were brought in, and already had Marianne been disappointed more than once by a rap at the neighboring door, when a loud one was suddenly heard which could not be mistaken for one at any other house. Eleanor felt secure of its announcing Willoughby's approach, and Marianne, starting up, moved towards the door. Everything was silent. This could not be borne many seconds. She opened the door, advancing a few steps towards the stairs, and after listening half a minute, returned into the room in all the agitation which a conviction of having heard him would naturally produce. In the ecstasy of her feelings at that instant, she could not help exclaiming, "Oh, Eleanor, it is Willoughby, indeed it is!" and seemed almost ready to throw herself into his arms, when Colonel Brandon appeared. Dun dun dun. It was too great a shock to be borne with calmness, and she immediately left the room. Eleanor was disappointed too, but at the same time her regard for Colonel Brandon ensured his welcome with her, and she felt particularly hurt that a man so partial to her sister should perceive that she experienced nothing but grief and disappointment in seeing him. She instantly saw that it was not unnoticed by him, and that he even observed Marianne as she quitted the room with such astonishment and concern as hardly left the recollection of what civility demanded towards herself. "Is your sister ill?" said he. Eleanor answered in some distress that she was, and then talked of headaches, low spirits, and over fatigues, and of everything to which she could decently attribute her sister's behavior. He heard her with the most earnest attention, but, seeming to recollect himself, said no more on the subject, and began directly to speak of his pleasure at seeing them in London, making the usual inquiries about their journey and the friends they had left behind. In this calm kind of way, with very little interest on either side, they continued to talk, both of them out of spirits, and the thought of both engaged elsewhere. Eleanor wished very much to ask whether Willoughby were then in town, but she was afraid of giving him pain by any inquiry after his arrival, and at length, by way of saying something, she asked if he had been in London ever since she had last seen him. "Yes," he replied with some embarrassment, "almost ever since. I have been once or twice at Delaford for a few days, but it has never been in my power to return to Barton." This and the manner in which it was said immediately brought back to her remembrance all the circumstances of his quitting the place, with the uneasiness and suspicions they had caused to Mrs. Jennings, and she was fearful that her question had implied much more curiosity on the subject than she had ever felt. Mrs. Jennings soon came in. "Oh, Colonel!" said she, with her usual noisy cheerfulness. Both are true. "I am monstrous glad to see you. Sorry I could not come before. Beg your pardon, but I have been forced to look about me a little and settle my matters, for it is a long while since I have been at home, and you know one has always a world of little odd things to do after one has been away for any time. And then I have been, and then I have had Cartwright to settle with. Lord, I have been as busy as a bee ever since dinner. But pray, Colonel, how came you to conjure out that I should be in town today?" "I had the pleasure of hearing it at Mr. Palmer's, where I have been dining." "Oh, you did? Well, how do they all do at their house? How does Charlotte do? I warrant you she is a fine size by this time." Mrs. Palmer appeared quite well, and I am commissioned to tell you that you will certainly see her tomorrow. "Ay, to be sure, I thought as much. Well, Colonel, I have brought two young ladies with me. You see but one of them now, but there is another somewhere. Your friend Miss Mary Ann, too, which you will not be sorry to hear. I do not I do not know what you and Mr. Willoughby will do between you about her. God, she's always starting something. I do not know what you and Mr. Willoughby will do with you, but to do between you. Oh my goodness. What you and Mr. Willoughby will do between you about her. Ay, it is a fine thing to be young and handsome. Well, I was young once, but I never very handsome. Worse luck for me. However, I got a very good husband, and I don't know what the greatest beauty can do more. Ah, poor man, he has been dead these 8 years and better. But, Colonel, where have you been to since we parted? And how does your business go on? Come, come, let's have no secrets among friends," he replied with his customary mildness to her inquiries, but without satisfying her in any. Eleanor now began to make the tea, and Marianne was obliged to appear again. After her entrance, Colonel Brandon became more thoughtful and silent than he had been before, and Mrs. Jennings could not prevail on him to stay long. No other visitor appeared that evening, and the ladies were unanimous in agreeing to go early to bed. Marianne rose the next morning with recovered spirits and happy looks. The disappointment of the evening before seemed forgotten in the expectation of what was to happen that day. They had not long finished their breakfast before Mrs. Palmer's barouche stopped at the door. Barouche. And in a few minutes she came laughing into the room, so delighted to see them all that it was hard to say whether she received most pleasure from meeting her mother or the Miss Dashwoods again. So surprised at their coming to town, though it was what she had rather expected all along, so angry at their accepting her mother's invitation after having declined her own, though at the same time she would never have forgiven them if they had not come. "Mr. Palmer will be so happy to see you," said she. "What do you think he said when he heard of your coming with mamma? I forgot what it was now, but it was something so droll." After an hour or two spent in what her mother called a comfortable chat, or in other words, in every variety of inquiry concerning all their acquaintance on Mrs. Jennings's side, and in laughter without cause on Mrs. Palmer's, it was proposed by the latter that they should all accompany her to some shop where she had business that morning, to which Mrs. Jennings and Eleanor readily consented, as having likewise some purchases to make themselves, and Marianne, though declining it at first, was induced to go likewise. Wherever they went, she was evidently always on the watch. In Bond Street, especially, where much of their business lay, her eyes were in constant inquiry, and in whatever shop the party were engaged, her mind was equally abstracted from everything actually before them, from all that interested and occupied the others, restless and dissatisfied everywhere. Her sister could never obtain her opinion of any article of purchase, however it might equally concern them both. She received no pleasure from anything, was only impatient to be at home again, and could with difficulty govern her vexation at the tediousness of Mrs. Palmer, whose eyes whose eye was caught by everything pretty, expensive, or new, who was wild to buy all, could determine on none, and dawdled away her time in rapture and indecision. Uh, Women, am I right? I think it's literally all women in the chat right now. It was late in the morning before they returned home, and no sooner had they entered the house than Marianne flew eagerly upstairs, and when Eleanor followed, she followed her, turning from the table with a sorrowful countenance which declared that no Willoughby had been there. "Has no letter been left here for me since we went out?" said she to the footman, who then entered with the parcels. She was answered in the negative. "Are you quite sure of it?" she replied. "Are you certain that no servant, no porter, has left any letter or note?" The man replied that none had. "How very odd," said she in a low and disappointed voice, as she turned away to the window. "How odd, indeed," repeated Eleanor within herself, regarding her sister with uneasiness. If she had not known him to be in town, she would not have written to him as she did. She would have written to Combe Magna. And if he is in town, how odd that he should neither come nor write. Oh, my dear mother, you must be wrong in permitting an engagement between a daughter so young, a man so little known, to be carried on in so doubtful, so mysterious a manner. I long to inquire, how will my interference be borne?" She determined, after some consideration, that if appearances continued many days longer as unpleasant as they now were, she would represent in the strongest manner to her mother the necessity of some serious inquiry into the affair. Mrs. Palmer and the two elderly ladies of Mrs. Jennings's intimate acquaintance, whom she had met and invited in the morning, dined with them. The former left them soon after tea to fulfill her evening engagements, and Eleanor was obliged to assist in making a whist table for the others. Marianne was of no use on these occasions, as she would never learn the game, but though her time was therefore at her own disposal, the evening was by no means more productive of pleasure to her than to Eleanor. than to Eleanor. For it was spent in all the anxiety of expectation and the pain of disappointment. She sometimes endeavored for a few minutes to read. The book was soon thrown aside. She returned to the more interesting employment of walking backwards and forwards across the room, pausing for a moment whenever she came to the window in hopes of distinguishing the long expected rap. End of chapter 26. Oh man, I got a bad feeling about this Willoughby character. I think Eleanor might be right. Excuse me. My oh my. Maybe Eleanor, maybe Marianne's gonna have to eat her words about only ever loving one man. Boy, I hope that prediction's wrong. Well, on to chapter 27. If no one had. This is a funny book. I'm chuckling along at all the little things that, all the little snide comments about Mrs. Jennings, and you really get the sense that she's kind of writing about behaviors she's seen. Yahoo 27. Oh, and I don't know what a whist table is, but I assume it's a type of card game. I love playing cards. Oh, Yahoo 27. I agree. Yahoo! Chapter 27. If this open weather holds much longer, said Mrs. Jennings, when they meet at breakfast the following morning, Sir John will not be leaving Barton next week. It is a sad thing for sportsmen to lose a day's pleasure. Poor souls! I always pity them when they do. They seem to take it so much to heart. That is true, cried Marianne in a cheerful voice, and walking to the window as she spoke to examine the day. I had not thought of that. The weather will keep many sportsmen in the country. Nacho radioactive credit card debt with untreated scoliosis looking Bude reading again. Oh, Sabian, my foe, my enemy, come here to insult me again. I won't stand for it. I'll continue to read. It was not a lucky recollection. All her good spirits were restored by it. It is charming weather for them indeed, she continued as she sat down to the breakfast table with a happy countenance. How much they enjoy it! But the little return of anxiety cannot be expected to last long. This time of year, and after such a series of rain, we shall certainly have very little more of it. Frosts will soon set in, and in all probability with severity. In another day or two, perhaps, this extreme mildness can hardly last longer. Nay, perhaps it may freeze tonight. At any rate, said Eleanor, wishing to prevent Mrs. Jennings from seeing her sister's thoughts as clearly as she did, I dare say we shall have Sir John and Lady Middleton in town by the end of next week. Ay, my dear, I'll warrant you we do. Mary always has her own way. And now, slightly conjectured Eleanor, she will write to Combe by this day's post. But if she did, the letter was written and sent away with a privacy which eluded all her watchfulness to ascertain the fact. Whatever the truth of it might be, and far as Eleanor was from feeling thorough contentment about it, yet while she saw Marianne in spirits, she could not be very uncomfortable herself, and Marianne was in spirits, happy in the mildness of the weather, and still happier in the expectation of a frost. The morning was chiefly spent in leaving cards at the houses of Mrs. Jennings' acquaintance to inform them of her being in town, and Marianne was all the time busy in observing the direction of the wind, watching the variations of the sky, and imagining an alteration in the air. Don't you find it colder than it was in the morning, Eleanor? There seems to be me a very decided difference. I can hardly keep my hands warm even in my muff. I was not so yesterday, I think. The clouds seem parting too. The sun will be out in a moment, and we shall have a clear afternoon. Sabian. Eleanor was alternatively diverted and pained, but Marianne preserved and saw every night in the brightness of a fire, and every morning in the appearance of the atmosphere, the certain symptoms of approaching frost. The Miss Dashwoods had no greater reason to be dissatisfied with Mrs. Jennings' style of living and set of acquaintance than with her behavior to themselves, which was invariably kind. Everything in her household arrangements was conducted on the most liberal plan, and expecting a few old city friends whom, to Lady Middleton's regret, she had never dropped, she visited no one to whom an introduction could at all discompose the feelings of her young companions. Pleased to find herself more comfortably situated in that particular than she had expected, Eleanor was very willing to compound for the want of much real enjoyment from any of their evening parties, which, whether at home or abroad, formed only for cards, would have little to amuse her. It's Sense and Sensibility, Sabian. Sense and Sensibility. Colonel Brandon, no, this old fuddy duddy, Colonel Brandon, who had a general invitation to the house, was with them almost every day. He came to look at Marianne and talk to Eleanor, who often derived more satisfaction from conversing with him than from any other daily occurrence, but who saw at the same time, with much concern, his continued regard for her sister. She feared it was a strengthening regard. It grieved her to see the earnestness with, with which he often watched Marianne. His spirits were certainly worse than when at Barton. About a week after their arrival, it became certain that Willoughby was also arrived. His card was on the table when they came in from the morning's drive. Good God! Cried Marianne. He has been here while we were out. Eleanor, rejoicing to be assured of his being in London, now ventured to say, Depend upon it he will call again tomorrow. But Marianne seemed hardly to hear her, and on Mrs. Jennings' entrance, escaped with the precious card. This event, while it raised the spirits of Eleanor, restored to those of her sister and all, and more than all, their former agitation. From this moment her mind was never quiet. The expectation of seeing him every hour of the day made her unfit for anything. She insisted on being left behind the next morning when the others were out. Eleanor's thoughts were full of what might be passing in Berkeley Street during their absence, but a mother's glance at her sister when they returned was enough to inform her that Willoughby had paid no second visit there. A note was just then brought in and laid on the table. For me? Cried Marianne, stepping hastily forward. No, ma'am, for my mistress. But Marianne, not convinced, took it instantly up. It is indeed for Mrs. Jennings. How provoking! You are expecting a letter, then? Said Eleanor, unable to be longer silent. Yes, a little, not much. After a short pause, you have no confidence in me, Marianne. Nay, Eleanor, this reproach from you, you who have been you who have confidence in no one, Me, returned Eleanor in some confusion. Indeed, Marianne, I have nothing to tell. Nor I, answered Marianne with energy. Our situations then are alike. We have neither of us anything to tell. You because you communicate, and I because I conceal nothing. Eleanor, distressed by this charge of reserve in herself, which she was not at liberty to do away, knew not how, under such circumstances, to press for greater openness in Marianne. Mrs. Jennings soon appeared, and the note being given her, she read it aloud. It was from Lady Middleton, announcing their arrival in Conduit Street the night before, and requesting the company of her mother and cousins the following evening. Business on Sir John's part, and a violent cold on her own, prevented their calling in Berkeley Street. Ugh. You're gonna go over to her house while she says, I'm sorry, I'm really sick. Can you guys just come here so I don't have to go there? That's disgusting. The invitation was accepted, but when the hour of appointment drew near, necessary as it was in common civility to Mrs. Jennings that they should both attend her on such a visit, Eleanor had some difficulty in persuading her sister to go, for still she had seen nothing of Willoughby, and therefore was not more indisposed for amusement abroad than unwilling to run the risk of his calling again in her absence. Eleanor found, when the evening was over, that disposition is not materially altered by a change of abode. For although scarcely settled in town, Sir John had contrived to collect around him nearly 20 young people and amuse them with a ball. This was an affair, however, of which Lady Middleton did not approve. In the country, an unpremeditated dance was very allowable, but in London, where the reputation of elegance was more important and less easily obtained, was risking too much for the gratification of a few girls to have it known that Lady Middleton had given a small dance of 8 or 9 couples, with 2 violins and a mere sideboard collection. Oh, that sounds like a horrible time. Only 8 or 9 couples, 2 violins, that's it. Mr. and Mrs. Palmer were of the party, from the former whom they had not seen before since their arrival in town, as he was careful to avoid the appearance of any attention to his mother-in-law, and therefore never came near her. They received no mark of recognition on their entrance. He looked at them slightly without seeming to know who they were, and merely nodded to Mrs. Jennings from the other side of the room. Marianne gave one glance round the apartment as she entered. It was enough. He was not there. She sat down, equally ill disposed to receive or communicate pleasure. After they had been assembled about an hour, Mr. Palmer sauntered towards the Misses Dashwoods to express his surprise on seeing them in town. Though Colonel Brandon had been first informed of their arrival at his house, and he had himself said something very droll on hearing that they were to come. I thought you were both in Devonshire, said he. Did you? Replied Eleanor. When do you go back again? I do not know. And thus ended their discourse. Oh, I thought you were in Devonshire. Did you? When do you go back again? I don't know. Great conversation. And thus ended their discourse. Never had Marianne been so unwilling to dance in her life as she was that evening, and never so much fatigued by the exercise. She complained of it as they returned to Berkeley Street. Ay, ay, said Mrs. Jennings, we know the reason of all that very well. If a certain person, who shall remain nameless, had been there, you would not have been a bit tired. And to say the truth, it was not very pretty of him not to give you the meeting when he was invited. Invited? Cried Marianne. So my daughter Middleton told me. for it seems Sir John met him somewhere in the street this morning." Marianne said no more, but looked exceedingly hurt, impatient in this situation to be doing something that might lead to her sister's relief. Eleanor resolved to write the next morning in her mother, and hoped by awakening her fears for the health of Marianne to procure those inquiries which had been so long delayed. She was still more eagerly bent on this measure by perceiving after breakfast on the morrow that Marianne was again writing to Willoughby, for she could not suppose it to be to any other person. She's doing the classic. She's texting him a million times. Hey, I didn't get a response. Uh, this is just the classic version of that, equally as sad. Such realistic dialogue, says Morgan Olivia 47. Well, good to hear you're 47, but yeah, it is. It is just like a nice little snapshot of the times. Very entertaining. About the middle of the day, Mrs. Jennings went out by herself on business, and Eleanor began her letter directly, while Mary Ann, too restless for employment, too anxious for conversation, walked from one window to the other or sat down by the fire in melancholy meditation. Eleanor was very earnest in her application to her mother, relate, relating all that had passed, her suspicions of Willoughby's inconsistency, urging her by every plea of duty and affection to demand from Marianne an account of her real situation with respect to him. Her letter was scarcely finished when a rap foretold a visitor, and Colonel Brandon was announced. Marianne, who had seen him from the window, and who hated company of any kind, left the room before he entered it. He looked more than usually grave, and though expressing satisfaction at finding Miss Dashwood alone, as if he had somewhat in particular to tell her, sat for some time without saying a word. Eleanor, persuaded that he had some communication to make in which her sister was concerned, impatiently expected its opening. It was not the first time of her feeling the same kind of conviction, for more than once before, beginning with the observation of "Your sister looks unwell today," or "Your sister seems out of spirits," he had appeared on the point either of disclosing or of inquiring something particular about her. After a pause of several minutes, their silence was broken by his asking her in a voice of some agitation when he was to congratulate her on the acquisition of a brother. Eleanor was not prepared for such a question, and having no answer ready to Eleanor was not prepared for such a question, and having no answer ready, was obliged to adopt the simple and common expedient of asking what he meant. He tried to smile as he replied, "Your sister's engagement to Mr. Willoughby is very generally known." "It cannot be generally known," returned Eleanor, "for her own family do not know it." He looked surprised and said, "I beg your pardon. I am afraid my inquiry has been impertinent, but I had not supposed any secrecy intended, as they openly correspond, and their marriage is universally talked of." "How can that be? By whom can you have heard it mentioned?" "By many. By some of whom you know nothing, by others with whom you are most intimate. Mrs. Jennings, Mrs. Palmer, and the Middletons. But still I might not have believed it, for where the mind is, perhaps, rather unwilling to be convinced, it will always find something to support its doubts. If I had not, when the servant let me in today, accidentally seen a letter in his hand, directed to Mr. Willoughby in your sister's writing. I came to inquire, but I was convinced before I could ask the question. Is everything finally settled? Is it impossible to but I have no right. And I could have no chance of succeeding. Excuse me, Miss Dashwood. I believe I have been wrong in saying so much, but I hardly know what to do, and on your prudence I have the strongest dependence. Tell me that it is all absolutely resolved on, that any attempt in short concealment, if concealment be possible, is all that remains. These words, which conveyed to Eleanor a direct avowal of his love for his sister, her sister, affected her very much. She was not immediately able to say anything, and even when her spirits were recovered, she debated for a short time on the answer it would be most proper to give. The real state of things between Willoughby and her sister was so little known to herself that in endeavoring to explain it, she might be as liable to say too much as too little. Yet, as she was convinced that Mary Ann's affection for Willoughby could leave no hope of Colonel Brandon's success, whatever the event of that affection might be, and at the same time wished to shield her conduct from censure. She thought it most prudent and kind, after some consideration, to say more than she really knew or believed. She acknowledged, therefore, that though she had never been informed by themselves of the terms on which they stood with each other, of their mutual affection she had no doubt, and of their correspondence she was not astonished to hear. He listened to her with silent attention, and on her ceasing to speak, rose directly from his seat, and after saying in a voice of emotion, I like that, to your sister, I wish all to your sister, I wish all imaginable happiness. To Willoughby, that he may endeavor to deserve her. Took leave and went away. Eleanor derived no comfortable feelings from this conversation. To lessen the uneasiness of her mind on other points, she was left, on the contrary, with a melancholy impression of Colonel Brandon's unhappiness, and was prevented even from wishing it removed by her anxiety for the very event that must confirm it. End of chapter 27. Oh, Sabian, settle down, Sabian. Relax, okay? Be nice. Play nice and chat. I am 47 years young, says Morgan. Olivia's 47. And I know that to be true. I can actually confirm that. What's Willoughby up to, man? What's he up to? He's catting around on her or something. He doesn't even show up to the party. He doesn't even show up to the party, man. He couldn't even show up at the party. Come on. I don't trust this Willoughby character, man. Oy oy oy. Oy 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 oy. Well, let's continue. 47 years young. Well, that's a coincidence because we're on chapter 28. Completely unrelated number, but they're both numbers. Kind of a coincidence. Uh, Let me see something. Chapter. Oh, it seems the London arc here goes on at least past. Sure. I don't want to spoil anything for myself here, but it seems it goes on for this Willoughby character, man. This character, man. Why do you have a crown next to your name, Angel Cakes 36? Prime Gaming. I don't know what that means, but it probably means that you're paying Amazon money. It's a sin in my eyes. Those sheep shears you playing with look hella small next to you. Yeah, these are. These right here are actually triple extra large uh, llama shears. This is actually 47 inches across. So, yeah. I'm a giant. I'm 29 feet tall. I'm actually 28 feet tall. Chapter 28 feet tall, that is. 28. Nothing occurred during the next 3 or 4 days to make Eleanor regret what she had done in applying to her mother. One free sub a month. Use that on me. Nah, just kidding. I would never threaten somebody on Twitch. That would get me banned. Please don't report me. Chapter 28. I'm banned now. Somebody just reported me. Nothing occurred during the next 3 or 4 days to make Eleanor regret what she had done in applying to her mother. For Willoughby neither came nor wrote. They were engaged about the end of that time to attend Lady Middleton to a party from which Mrs. Jennings was kept away by the indisposition of her youngest daughter. And for this party, Marianne, wholly dispirited, careless of her appearance, and seeming equally indifferent whether she went or stayed, prepared without one look of hope or one expression of pleasure. She sat by the drawing room fire after tea till the moment of Lady Middleton's arrival, without once stirring from her seat or altering her attitude, lost in her own thoughts and insensible of her sister's presence. And when at last they were told that Lady Middleton waited for them at the door, she thought she started as if she had forgotten that any one was expected. Whew. Thank you, Angel Cakes, for loving my channel. All this Amazon subscription money going to greedy warehouse workers wanting to use the toilet. I agree. Get in the emotional sensibility chamber, the isolation cube they put people in when they're having panic attacks because they are working at Amazon. My dog thought you meant a sandwich. Oh, a sub. I assume your dog, farm dog. They arrived in due time at the place of destination, and as soon as the string of carriages before them would allow, alighted, ascending the stairs, heard their names announced from one landing place to another in an audible voice, and entering a room splendidly lit up, quite full of company, and insufferably hot. When they had paid their tribute of politeness by curtsying to the lady of the house, they were permitted to mingle in the crowd and take their share of the heat and inconvenience. That's such a funny way to describe a party. They were permitted to mingle in the crowd and take their share of the heat and inconvenience, to which their arrival must necessarily add. After some time spent in saying little and doing less, Lady Middleton sat down to casino, and, as Marianne was not in spirits for moving about, she and Eleanor, luckily succeeding to chairs, placed themselves at no great distance from the table. They had not remained in this manner long before Eleanor perceived Willoughby. He's here, standing within a few yards of them, in earnest conversation with a very fashionable looking young woman. No. She soon caught his eye, and he immediately bowed, but without attempting to speak to her or to approach Marianne. Oh, God. Oh, that hurts. Ugh, I can't even read that. That's just too awkward. Just, oh, hey, the guy she thinks of herself as engaged to. Oh, then continued his discourse with the same lady. Oh, Eleanor turned involuntarily to Marianne to see whether it could be unobserved by her. At the moment she first perceived him, her whole countenance glowed with sudden delight. She would have moved towards him instantly, had not her sister caught hold of her. Good heavens! She exclaimed. He is there! He is there! Oh, why does he not look at me? Why can I not speak to him? Pray, pray, be composed, cried Eleanor, and do not betray what you feel to everyone present. Perhaps he has not observed you yet. This, however, was more than she could believe herself, and to be composed at such a moment was not only beyond the reach of Marianne, was beyond her wish. She sat in an agony of impatience which affected every feature. At last he turned round again and regarded them both. She started up, and pronouncing his name in a tone of affection, held out her hand to him. He approached, and addressing himself rather to Eleanor than Marianne, as if wishing to avoid her eye, and determined not to observe her attitude, inquired in a hurried manner after Mrs. Dashwood, and asked how long they had been in town. Eleanor was robbed of all presence of mind by such an address, and was unable to say a word, but the feelings of her sister were instantly expressed. Her face was crimsoned over, and she exclaimed in a voice of the greatest emotion, Good God! Willoughby! What is the meaning of this? Have you not received my letters? Will you not shake hands with me? He could not then avoid it, but her touch seemed painful to him, and he held her hand only for a moment. During all this time he was evidently struggling for composure. Eleanor watched his countenance and saw its expression becoming more tranquil. After a moment's pause, he spoke with calmness. I did myself the honor of calling in Berkeley Street last Tuesday, and very much regretted that I was not fortunate enough to find you and Mrs. Jennings at home. My card was not lost, I hope. But have you received my note? But have you not received my notes? Cried Marianne in the wildest anxiety. There is some mistake, I am sure. Some dreadful mistake. What can be the meaning of it? Tell me, Willoughby, for heaven's sake, tell me what is the matter. He made no reply. His complexion changed, and all his embarrassment returned. But as if, on catching the eye of the young lady with whom he had been previously talking, he felt the necessity of instant exertion, he recovered himself again, and after saying, Yes, I had the pleasure of receiving the information of your arrival in town, which you were so good as to send me, turned hastily away with a slight bow, and joined his friend. Oof. Oh, Marianne, that's just hard to read. Marianne, now looking dreadfully white and unable to stand, sank into her chair, and Eleanor, expecting every moment to see her faint, tried to screen her from the observation of others while reviving her with lavender water. Go to him, Eleanor, she cried as soon as she could speak, and force him to come to me. Tell him I must see him again, must speak to him instantly. Cannot rest. I shall not have a moment's peace till this is explained. Some dreadful misapprehension or other. Oh, go to him this moment. This is why you don't fall in love with somebody after knowing them for a week. You definitely got to give it a little time to make sure they're not completely nuts. I mean, Willoughby. Marianne's nuts in her own way, but it's more charming. Uh, how can that be done? No, my dearest Marianne, you must wait. This is not a place for explanations. Wait only till tomorrow. With difficulty, however, she could prevent her from following him herself, and to persuade her to check her agitation, to wait at least with the appearance of composure till she might speak to him with more privacy and more effect, was impossible, for Marianne continued incessantly to give way in a low voice to the misery of her feelings by exclamations of wretchedness. In a short time, Eleanor saw Willoughby quit the room by the door towards the staircase, and telling Marianne that he was gone, urged the impossibility of speaking to him again that evening as a fresh argument for her to be calm. She instantly begged her sister would entreat Lady Middleton to take them home, as she was too miserable to stay another minute longer. Lady Middleton, though in the middle of a rubber, on being informed that Marianne was unwell, was too polite to object for a moment to her wish of going away, and, making over her cards to a friend, they departed as soon as the carriage could be found. Scarcely a word was spoken during their return to Berkeley Street. Marianne was in a silent agony, too much oppressed even for tears. As Mrs. Jennings was luckily not come home, they could go directly to their own room, where hartshorn restored her a little to herself. What's hartshorn? I'll look that up after. She was soon undressed and in bed, and as she seemed desirous of being alone, her sister then left her, and while she waited the return of Mrs. Jennings, leisure enough for thinking over the past. That some kind of engagement had subsisted between Willoughby and Marianne she could not doubt, and that Willoughby was weary of it seemed equally clear. For however Marianne might still feed her own wishes, she could not attribute such behaviour to mistake or misapprehension of any kind. Nothing but a thorough change of sentiment could account for it. Her indignation would have been still stronger than it was had she not witnessed that embarrassment which seemed to speak a consciousness of his own misconduct and prevented her from believing him so unprincipled as to have been sporting with the affections of her sister from the first, without any design that would bear investigation. Absence might have weakened his regard, and convenience might have determined him to overcome it. But that such a regard had formerly existed, she could not bring herself to doubt. As for Marianne, on the pangs which so unhappy a meeting must already have given her, and on those still more severe which might await her in its probable consequence, she could not reflect without the deepest concern. Her own situation gained in the comparison, for while she could esteem Edward as much as ever, however they might be divided in future, her mind might be always supported. But every circumstance that could embitter such an evil seemed uniting to heighten the misery of Marianne in a final separation from Willoughby, in an immediate, irreconcilable rupture with him. Geez, Willoughby, what you get up to, man? Were you just playing with this poor little girl's heart? That's why you don't want to, you probably don't want to do that. Hearts. What was it? Heartsham? Something like that? Hearts. Hartshorn. What's hartshorn? What is hartshorn used for? Ammonia. Oh. So it's made from it's hartshorn. It's heart is another way to say deer. It's literally deer's horn that I guess is turned collected for the ammonia. So I guess she gave her some sort of smelling salt, basically. Okay, I could have guessed hartshorn, I guess, with a name like that. That's Hart, heart, a male deer. If it's only a male, maybe female deers are called harts too, but I've only ever heard of hart as a male. Um, I'm no hunter though. I don't know all these terms. Let's try to get another chapter in at least. Getting a little late. Getting a little. The hour is getting late, but I think we have time for another chapter. I think it's a pretty long chapter actually. It's got a lot of letters and oh, I'm just too curious. We can't leave off on chapter 29. We got to get to chapter 30 at least. Come on. My goal is to finish this book by the new year. That's my New Year's resolution for this chapter to finish this book by the new year. And tomorrow I think I'll read A Christmas Carol for the Christmas season because I don't think I'll be able to stream again this week. As from Friday until probably Monday, I'll be engaged, uh, otherwise engaged for the holiday season. That'll be the Christmas break. But Tuesday, Wednesday, next week, I will probably try to finish this book if I have time. You know that I probably shouldn't have said that's a New Year's resolution because now that I think about it, that's going to be a hard resolution to get through. That's a that's a lot of pages throughout the nights. But well, we'll see. We'll see. Chapter 29. Before the housemaid had lit their fire the next day, or the sun gained any power over a cold, gloomy morning in January. We're catching up. We're kind of reading along with the similar time. Well, not really, because I hope to be finished with this before January, but probably not going to happen. Marianne, only half dressed, was kneeling against one of the window seats for the sake of all the little light she could command from it, and writing as fast as a continual flow of tears would permit her. In this situation, Eleanor, roused from sleep by her agitation and sobs, first perceived her, and after observing her for a few moments with silent anxiety, said in a tone of the most considerate gentleness, "Marianne, may I ask?" "No, Eleanor," she replied, "ask nothing. You will soon know all." The sort of desperate calmness with which this was said lasted no longer than while she spoke, and was immediately followed by a return of the same excessive afflictions. It was some minutes before she could go on with her letter, and the frequent bursts of grief which still obliged her at intervals to withhold her pen were proofs enough of her feeling how more than probable it was she was writing for the last time to Willoughby. Eleanor paid her every quiet and unobtrusive attention in her power, and she would have tried to soothe and tranquilize her still more, had not Marianne entreated her with all the eagerness of the most nervous irritability not to speak to her for the world. In such circumstances it was better for both that they should not be longer together. They should not be long together. And the restless state of Marianne's mind not only prevented her from remaining in the room a moment after she was dressed, but requiring at once solitude and continual change of place, made her wander about the house till breakfast time, avoiding the sight of everybody. At breakfast she neither ate nor attempted to eat anything, and Eleanor's attention was then all employed, not in urging her, not in pitying her, nor in appearing to regard her, but in endeavoring to engage Mrs. Jennings' notice entirely to herself. As this was a favorable meal with Mrs. Jennings, it lasted a considerable time. This was a favorite meal. She loves breakfast. Who doesn't? And they were just setting themselves, after it, round the common working table, when a letter was delivered to Marianne, which she eagerly caught from the servant, and turning of a death-like paleness, instantly ran out of the room. Eleanor, who saw as plainly by this as if she had seen the direction that it must come from Willoughby, felt immediately such a sickness at heart as made her hardly able to hold up her head, sat in such a general tremor as made her fear it impossible to escape Mrs. Jennings' notice. That good lady, however, saw only that Marianne had received a letter from Willoughby, which appeared to her a very good joke. Mrs. Jennings, come on, have some sense and sensibility. And which she treated accordingly, by hoping, with a laugh, that she would find it to her liking. Oh. Of Eleanor's distress, she was too busily employed in measuring lengths of worsted, worsted for her rug to see anything at all, and calmly continuing her talk as soon as Marianne disappeared, she said, "Upon my word, I never saw a young woman so desperately in love in my life. My girls were nothing to her, and yet they used to be foolish enough. But as for Miss Marianne, she is quite an altered creature. I hope from the bottom of my heart he won't keep her waiting much longer, for it is quite grievous to see her look so ill and forlorn. Pray, when are they to be married? Eleanor, though when are they to be married? So quick. Eleanor, though never less disposed to speak than at that moment, obliged herself to answer such an attack as this, and therefore trying to smile, replied, "And have you really, ma'am, talked yourself into a persuasion of my sister's being engaged to Mr. Willoughby? I thought it had been only a joke, but so serious a question seems to imply more. I must beg, therefore, that you will not deceive yourself any longer. I do assure you that nothing would surprise me more than to hear of their being going to be married." For shame, Miss Dashwood. How can you talk so? Don't we all know that it must be a match? That they were over head and ears in love with each other from the first moment they met? Did I not see them together in Devonshire every day and all day long? Did I not, I'm losing her voice, did I not know that your sister came to town with me on purpose to buy wedding clothes? Come, come, this won't do, because you are so sly about it yourself. You think nobody else has any senses, but it is no such thing. I can tell you, for it has been known all over town this ever so long. I tell everybody of it, and so does Charlotte. Oh, goodness gracious. "Indeed, ma'am," said Eleanor very seriously, "you are mistaken. Indeed, you are doing a very unkind thing in spreading the report, and you will find that you have, though you will not believe me now." Mrs. Jennings laughed again, but Eleanor had not spirits to say more, and eager at all events to know what Willoughby had written, hurried away to their room, where, in opening the door, she found Mary Ann stretched on the bed, almost choked by grief, one letter in her hand, and two or three others lying by her. Eleanor drew near, but without saying a word, and seating herself on the bed, took her hand, kissed her affectionately several times, and then gave way to a burst of tears, which at first was scarcely less violent than Mary Ann's. The latter, though unable to speak, seemed to feel all the tenderness of this behavior, and after some time thus spent in joint affliction, she put all the letters into Eleanor's hands, and covering her face with her handkerchief, almost screamed with agony. Eleanor, who knew that such grief, shocking as it was to witness it, must have its course, watching by her till this excess of suffering had somewhat spent itself, and then turning eagerly to Willoughby's letter, read as follows. Finally, an explanation from Willoughby. Let's see if we can get the cat on screen for a minute here. You went up, kitty? Oh no. He ran away. He's camera shy. He hates you all. Bond Street, January. My dear madam, I have just had the honor of receiving your letter, for which I beg to return my sincere acknowledgments. I am much concerned to find there was anything in my behavior last night that did not meet your approbation, and though I am quite at a loss to discover in what point I could be so unfortunate as to offend you, I entreat your forgiveness of what I can assure you to have been perfectly unintentional. I shall never reflect on my former acquaintance with your family in Devonshire without the most grateful pleasure, and flatter myself it will not be broken by any mistake or misapprehension of my actions. My esteem for your whole family is very sincere, but if I have been so unfortunate as to give rise to a belief of more than I felt or meant to express, I shall reproach myself for not having been more guarded in my professions of that esteem. And I should ever have meant more. You will allow to you will allow to be impossible when you understand that my affections have been long engaged elsewhere, and it will not be many weeks, I believe, before this engagement is fulfilled. It is with great regret that I obey your commands of returning the letters with which I have been honored from you, and the lock of hair which you so obligingly bestowed on me. I am, dear madam, your most obedient and humble servant, John Willoughby. You expect me to believe that you just accidentally let her on, Willoughby? Come on, man. That was the chair. With what indignation such a letter as this must be read by Miss Dashwood may be imagined. Though aware before she began it that it must bring a confession of his inconsistency and confirm their separation forever, she was not aware that such language could be suffered to announce it, nor could she have supposed Willoughby capable of departing so far from the appearance of every honourable and delicate feeling, so far from the common decorum of a gentleman, as to send a letter so imprudently cruel, a letter which, instead of bringing with his desire of a release any professions of regret, acknowledged no breach of faith, denied all peculiar affections whatever. A letter of which every line was an insult, and which proclaimed its writer to be deep in hardened villainy. She paused over it for some time with indignant astonishment, and read it again and again. Every perusal only served to increase her abhorrence of the man, and so bitter were her feelings against him that she dared not trust herself to speak, lest she might wound Marianne still deeper by treating this disengagement not as a loss to her of any possible good, but as an escape from the worst and most irremediable of all evils, a connection for life with an unprincipled man, and as as a deliverance the most real, a blessing the most important. That's true. A breakup is never bad because it was never meant to be in the first place. Never get back together with somebody. Breakups are always a good thing. Uh, I'm me speaking from my high horse here, like I know everything. In her earnest meditations on the contents of the letter, on the depravity of that mind which could delectate it, and probably on the very different mind of a very different person who had no other connection whatever with the affair than what her heart gave him with everything that passed. Eleanor forgot the immediate distress of her sister, forgot that she had 3 letters on her lap yet unread, and so entirely forgot how long she had been in the room that, when on hearing a carriage drive up to the door, she went to the window to see who could be coming so unreasonably early. She was all astonished to perceive Mrs. Jennings's chariot, which she knew had not been ordered till 1. Determined not to quit Marianne, though hopeless of contributing at present to her ease, she hurried away to excuse herself from attending Mrs. Jennings on account of her sister being indisposed. Angel Cake says, if it doesn't work out, I feel it's better to go separate ways than trying to find a way to make it work. Well, there's definitely some things that are better to work through, but if you're continually unhappy, if you're not gaining happiness from the relationship more than you're gaining, some negative feeling or other, probably just best to let it go. If you are seriously considering breaking up, probably best just to do it sooner rather than later, so as not to waste either person's time. My cat really is giving me. He's nudging me, trying to get my attention here. He wants my attention. Ah! 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 Sorry, he killed me. He just tried to kill me. He wanted my attention, but then attacked me immediately upon me picking him up. Evil. He's a villain. He's engaged in the most what is it? Engaged in the most hardened villainy, like Willoughby. Uh, Dr. Dangles. His name is Tai Lung, not Lang, not Hai Lang. Get it right, Dangles, and you're supposed to be a doctor. Uh, where was I? Before I got interrupted talking about breakups and kitties. Yeah. People are terrified to let relationships end, but it's better to let them. You should be sorry, Dangles! People are. Sorry, that's just a joke. I'm not really being mean to you. I'm just pretending to be mean to you. Even though it has the exact same result, me being mean to you. If I just say I'm pretending, then it doesn't count. And I can be as mean as I want to anybody. Um, where was I? Where was I? Where was Here we are. Mrs. Jennings, with a thoroughly good humored concern for its cause, admitted the excuse most readily, and Eleanor, after seeing her safe off, returned to Marianne, whom she found attempting to rise from the bed, and whom she joined just in time to prevent her from falling on the floor, faint and giddy from a long want of proper rest and food. For it was many days since she had any appetite, and many nights since she had really slept. And now, when her mind was no longer supported by the fever of suspense, the consequence of all this was felt in an aching head, a weakened stomach, and a general nervous faintness. A glass of wine, which Eleanor procured for her directly. Um, Mary Ann's only 17. You're giving her wine. That's illegal. A glass of wine, which Eleanor procured her directly, made her more comfortable, and she was at last able to express some sense of her kindness by saying, Poor Anna, poor Eleanor, how unhappy I make you. I only wish, replied her sister, there were anything I could do which might be of comfort to you. Lol, yes, be nice. We don't want to be like a character. This, as everything else would have been, was too much for Marianne, who could only exclaim in the anguish of her heart, "Oh, Eleanor, I am miserable indeed," before her voice was entirely lost in sobs. "Oh, oh, oh!" She's 17. You're supposed to go through heartbreak at 17. I can make fun of her all I want. Eleanor could no longer witness this torrent of unresisted grief in silence. "Exert yourself, dear Marianne," she cried, "if you would not kill yourself and all who love you. Think of your mother. Think of her misery while you suffer. For her sake, you must exert yourself." "I cannot, I cannot," cried Marianne. Leave me if I distress you. Leave me, hate me, forget me, but do not torture me so. Oh, how easy for those who have no sorrow of their own to talk of exertion. Happy, happy Eleanor, you cannot have an idea of what I suffer." 17, so self absorbed, can't possibly imagine that anybody else has any problems. Mary Eleanor literally just went through these exact same thing. "Do you call me happy, Marianne? Ah, if you knew! And can you believe me to be so, while I see you so wretched? Forgive me," throwing her arms round her sister's neck. "I know you feel for me. I know what a heart you have. But yet you must be happy. Edward loves you. What can do away with such happiness as that?" "Many, many circumstances," said Eleanor solemnly. "No, no, no!" cried Marianne wildly. "He loves you and only you. You can have no grief." "I can have no pleasure while I see you in this state, and you will never see me otherwise. Mine is a misery which nothing can do away." "You must not talk so, Marianne. Have you no comforts, no friends? Is your loss such as leaves no opening for consolation? Much as you suffer now, think of what you would have suffered if the discovery of his character had been delayed to a later period, if your engagement had been carried on for months and months, as it might have been, before he chose to put an end to it. Every additional day of unhappy confidence on your side would have been the blow more dreadful, would have made the blow more dreadful." "Engagement!" cried Marianne. "There has been no engagement." "No engagement! No, he is not so unworthy as you believe him. He has broken no faith with me." "But, but, but, he told you that he loved you." "Yes, no, never absolutely. It was every day implied, but never professedly declared. Sometimes I thought it had been, but it never was." "Yet you wrote to him." "Yes. Could that be wrong after all that had passed? But I cannot talk." This is the funniest breakup I've ever read. This is hilarious. he, she really did just like go fall completely head over heels with this guy who was like just like nice to her. Oh man. Eleanor said no more, and turning again to the three letters which now raised a much stronger curiosity than before, directly ran over the contents of all. The first, which was what her sister had sent him on their arrival in town, was to this effect: "I'm worried. I'm worried what Eleanor was gonna, what Mary Ann said to her. What she said to him after he's like an engaged guy. You know, he's being friendly or whatever, coming and visiting, and they were talking quite a bit. But he never even said I love you or anything like that. Oh my goodness." I'm worried that she embarrassed herself. Now I don't even want to read this. This is going to be cringe, as the kids say. Berkeley Street, January. How surprised you will be, Willoughby, on receiving this, and I think you will feel something more than surprise when you know that I am in town. An opportunity of coming hither, though with Mrs. Jennings, was a temptation we could not resist. I wish you may receive this in time to come here tonight, but I will not depend on it. At any rate, I shall expect you tomorrow. For the present, adieu. M.D. Whew. Kind of Russian things there for somebody who's not engaged to you. On her second note, which had been written on the morning after the dance at the Middletons, was in these words. So, not the one where she met him. I cannot express my disappointment in having missed you the day before yesterday, nor my astonishment at not having received any answer to a note which I sent you above a week ago. I have been expecting to hear from you, and still more to see you, every hour of the day. Pray call again as soon as possible, and explain the reason of my having expected this in vain. You had better come earlier another time, because we are generally out by one. We were last night at Lady Middleton's, where there was a dance. I have been told that you were asked to be of the party. Could it be so? You must be very much altered indeed since we parted, if that could be the case, and you not there. But I will not suppose this possible, and I hope very soon to receive your personal assurance of it being otherwise. M.D. Contents of her last note to him were these. What am I to imagine, Willoughby, by your behavior last night? Again, I demand an explanation of it. I was prepared to meet you with the pleasure which our separation naturally produced, with the familiarity which our intimacy at Barton appeared to me to justify. I was repulsed indeed. I have passed a wretched night in endeavoring to excuse a conduct which could scarcely be called less than insulting. But though I have not yet been able to form any reasonable apology for your behavior, I am perfectly ready to hear your justification of it. You have perhaps been misinformed or purposefully deceived in something concerning me, which may have lowered me in your opinion. Tell me what it is. Oh, explain the grounds on which you acted, and I shall be satisfied in being able to satisfy you. I would give grieve it would grieve me indeed to be obliged to think ill of you, but if I am to do it, if I am to learn that you are not what we have hitherto believed you, that your regard for us all was insincere, that your behavior to me was intended only to deceive, let it be told as soon as possible. My feelings are at present in a state of dreadful indecision. I wish to acquit you, but certainly on either side will be ease to what I now suffer. If your sentiments are no longer what they were, you will return my notes and the lock of my hair, which is in your possession. M.D. Whew. Now, I think my opinion of Willoughby really hinges on when he got that lock of her hair. If she sent it along with one of these letters, I don't remember. It's hard to remember if she gave it to him at Barton, but if she sent it with one of these letters, it's all Marianne's fault. She's he's a engaged guy. Yeah, he was probably overly nice to a single girl in this time period. Whatever. You got to consider the time period for sure. But if you're an engaged guy and this girl you spent like a couple weeks with or whatever, her whole family, not just her. I mean, she was the one who talked to you most, but you never like said, "Oh yes, we're engaged." You never proposed to her. You never said you love her or anything. You just hung out with her and talked to her about books and stuff. If she suddenly starts writing you and saying, "I need to talk to you tomorrow," starts talking all this stuff like, what does she say to him? She said, could it be so since I don't know. If she sent that hair along with one of these letters, that would come. I cannot blame him. That's just crazy. That would come across to me, at least in my modern perspective, as completely nuts. Um, but if she gave it to him before and he accepted it, that is kind of leading her on a bit there to accept a lock of hair. I'm buttoning one of my buttons here, not it came unbuttoned. Not doing anything nefarious down below. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say since I'm not from 1811, so you can't really judge these people unless you have a really good grasp of the society they come from. But I digress. That such letters, so full of affection. I guess I didn't digress. I was talking about the same thing over and over. Sorry, I annoyed myself by saying the wrong word. That such letters, so full of affection and confidence, could be so answered, Eleanor, for Willoughby's sake, would have been unwilling to believe. But her condemnation of him did not blind her to the impropriety of their having been written at all, and she was silently grieving over the imprudence which had hazarded such unsolicited proofs of tenderness not warranted by any proceeding, and most severely condemned by the event. When Marianne, perceiving that she had finished the letter, observed to her that they contained nothing but what any one would have written in the same situation, I felt myself, she added, to be as solemnly engaged to him as if the strictest. She felt it. I felt myself, she added, to be as solemnly engaged to him as if the strictest legal covenant had bound us to each other. Oof, I can believe it, said Eleanor, but unfortunately he did not feel the same. He did feel the same, Eleanor. For weeks and weeks he felt it. I know he did. Whatever may have changed him now, and nothing but the blackest art employed against me can have done it. I was once as dear to him as my own soul could wish. This lock of hair, which now he can so readily give up, was begged of me with the most earnest supplication. Okay, he's a jerk. Had you seen his look, his manner, had you heard his voice at that moment, have you forgot the last evening of our being together at Barton, the morning that we parted too, when he told me that it might be many weeks before we met again? His distress. Can I ever forget his distress? For a moment or two she could say no more. When this emotion had passed away, she added, in a firmer tone, Eleanor, I have been cruelly used, but not by Willoughby. Dearest Marianne, who but himself? By whom can he have been instigated? By all the world rather than by his own heart. I could rather believe every creature of my acquaintance leagued together to ruin me in his opinion than believe his nature capable of such cruelty. This woman of whom he writes, whoever she be, or anyone in short, but your own dear self, mamma, and Edward, may have been so barbarous to belay me. Beyond you three, is there a creature in the world whom I would not rather suspect of evil than Willoughby, whose heart I know so well? Eleanor would not contend, and only replied, Whoever may have been so detestably your enemy, let them be cheated of their malignant triumph, my dear sister, by seeing how nobly the consciousness of your own innocence and good intentions supports your spirits. It is a reasonable and laudable pride which resists such malevolence. No, no, cried Marianne. Misery such as mine has no pride. Prejudice. I care not who knows that I am wretched. The triumph of seeing me so, may be open to all the world. Eleanor, Eleanor, they who suffer little may be proud and independent as they like, may resist insult or return mortification, but I cannot. I must feel, I must be wretched, and they are welcome to enjoy the consciousness of it if they can. The consciousness of it that can. But for my mother's sake and mine, I would do more for you, my own. But to appear happy when I am so miserable, oh, who can require it? Again they were both silent. Eleanor was employed in walking thoughtfully from the fire to the window. I like that Eleanor. Oh no, I guess it wasn't just Eleanor. I think Eleanor consistently paces, but it might be Marianne I'm thinking of. Pacing is very good. Again they were both silent. Eleanor was employed in walking thoughtfully from the fire to the window, from the window to the fire, without knowing that she received warmth from one or discerning objects through the other. And Marianne, seated at the foot of the bed, with her head leaning against one of its posts, again took up Willoughby's letter, and after shuddering over every sentence, exclaimed, "It is too much! Oh, Willoughby, Willoughby, could this be yours? Cruel, cruel, nothing can acquit you. Eleanor, nothing can. Whatever he might have heard against me, ought he not to have suspended his belief? Ought he not to have told me of it? To have given me the power of clearing it? The lock of hair," repeating it from the letter, "which you so obligingly bestowed on me. This is unpardonable, Willoughby. Where was your heart when you wrote these words? Oh, barbarously insolent! Eleanor, can he be justified?" "No, Marianne, in no possible way." "And yet this woman, who knows what her art may have been, how long it may have been premeditated, and how deeply contrived by her? Who is she? Who can she be? Whom did I ever hear him talk of as young and attractive among his female acquaintance? Oh, no one, no one. He talked to me only of myself." Another pause ensued. Marianne was greatly agitated, and it ended thus: "Eleanor, I must go home. I must go and comfort mamma. Can we not be gone tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, Marianne!" "Yes, why should I stay here? I came only for Willoughby's sake, and now who cares for me? Who regards me? It would be impossible to go tomorrow. We owe Mrs. Jennings much more than civility, and civility of the commonest kind must prevent such a hasty removal as that. Well, then, another day or two, perhaps, but I cannot stay here long. I cannot stay to endure the questions and remarks of all these people, the Middletons and Palmers. How am I to bear their pity? The pity of such a woman as Lady Middleton. Oh, what would he say to that?" Eleanor advised her to lie down again, and for a moment she did so, but no attitude could give her ease, and in restless pain of mind and body she moved from one posture to another, till growing more and more hysterical, her sister could with difficulty keep her on the bed at all, for some time was fearful of being constrained to call for assistance. Some lavender drops, however, she was at length persuaded to take, were of use, and from that time till Mrs. Jennings returned, she continued on the bed quiet and motionless. End of chapter 30. Yeah, this gives me trust issues, says Slimy Ducks. Yeah, I guess you never know who you can trust, but let's be real, she knew this guy for like a week. I feel so sorry for Marianne. Yeah, he was kind of a jerk in that one, demanding her lock of her hair like he. That's such a romantic gesture. You expect me to believe that that was an accidental leading on? I don't buy it. Yeah, Willoughby's a jerk. Now Colonel Brandon has a chance, though. Colonel Brandon, the man who's 35, and swoosh on in and comfort Marianne in these trying times and gain her affections. She'll never love again. She who speaks so passionately about one love in this life. I don't buy it. I think she's going to fall in love with somebody else. Can you believe it that a a romance is going to have romance in it? I suspect it. I suspect it to be the case that this romance book will have more romance to come. But is Eleanor to be forever single? She's 25, and it's barely discussed any suitable bachelors for her. Edward Ferrars, is he to give up his previous engagement and return to Eleanor's love? Return her love? Ooh, I suppose we'll just have to keep reading to find out. She'll find love too. Yeah, somehow I think that is probably going to happen. Uh, I don't mean to sound snide about this because I do really like this book, but I think it's probably pretty predictable that they're both going to happily be married by the end of the book. Not a lot of these books from this period that I've read had sad endings in any way. Usually, pretty much end in a happy marriage or two. So I'm hopeful. The book says she's only 17. Right, I'm sure she will. Marianne is only 17. Um, Eleanor is 25. 5 and 20, as they would put it. Um, I think Marianne is probably going to end up with Colonel Brandon, but we'll see because it's sort of a Pride and Prejudice situation. I think I'm trapped in this book. Slimy ducks. Oh no. It's not the worst book to end up trapped in. The worst book to end up trapped in would probably be Story of the Eye. I'm not even going to describe what that is. Don't even look it up if you're faint of heart. But that would probably be the worst book to be trapped in. Or American Psycho if you are the psycho. Or Blood Meridian, especially if you're not white. Well, really, either way, it would suck to be in Blood Meridian, no matter what your race. Um, yeah, there's a lot of books you wouldn't want to be trapped in. Hmm. Unless you're Ishmael, you wouldn't want to be trapped in Moby Dick. Because, well, I won't say. But next stream reading, Joseph Goebbels' biography. Why would you say that, Sabian? Come on now. You know that's not in the public domain. I can't read that. Who is that? You don't want to know. Slimy ducks. He's one of the, one of the N words. That is to say, he's a Nazi. He's an N word, Nazi. Um, are you streaming over Christmas? Slimy ducks, and for anybody watching, he's a nasty. Yes, he is. I'll uh, I'll stream again tomorrow. I believe tomorrow will be the Christmas special. I'll read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Um, for the Christmas special. Very famous story that I'm sure all of you have heard so many times that you will not care. But I'll read it and I'll try to give it a character. Tomorrow, Christmas special, and then Thursday, I'm previously engaged every Thursday. Well, actually, I don't know. Maybe this Thursday we won't be able to do it. Thursday's a maybe, probably not. Friday, I'll be traveling. Shouldn't say what I'm doing, actually. I will be traveling, but I'll be back home on Saturday. Don't worry. But I'll be previously engaged, or not previous. I'll be engaged on 23rd, the 24th, the 25th for Christmas. So that will be the Christmas break. 26th is a maybe. Probably. I'll probably stream on that Tuesday. Back to Sense and Sensibility. 27th, another probably Sense and Sensibility. Thursday, once again, every Thursday I can't. And then I think that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday I'll also be busy, and Monday probably too. New Year's Eve stream, probably not. New Year's Eve stream, maybe, but it probably won't be reading. It'll, you know, New Year's Eve stream probably not going to be reading. Uh, St. Patrick's Day, we could do a drinking game stream or something. Singing. Your busy Sunday. Yes, I'm not going to stream on. I'm probably not going to stream on New Year's Eve. I hope you enjoy your travel and Christmas plans. Yeah, to travel. Who said I was going to travel? I didn't say travel. I'll be home the whole time. don't don't put words in my mouth there, Angel K. Come on. I'm not traveling. You got to see your beautiful aunt. Yeah, my beautiful Aunt Mary. Just kidding. My bad. Travel. Who could ever say anything about travel online? I would never speak of my personal. He looks at me. He won't. He doesn't want to look at the screen. He's looking at me deeply in my eyes. Says Dangles. All right, I'll get to see my beautiful Aunt Dangles. I mean, yeah, personal stuff. Who said anything about this personal stuff? I don't know. I don't have an aunt. I don't have a mom. I don't have any family. I come from a pod. I'm a pod person. That's why I read books. Okay, guys. 10 o'clock here. It's getting to be time to sign off. This has been No Family. Yeah. I don't know. You don't want to talk about that leopard looks hella small. Thank you for streaming and reading the book. Bookshelf reveal. Yeah, I'll do a bookshelf reveal one day. I'll do a bookshelf stream one day. I have 3 of them. And some in my closet. Some books in my closet. I got a lot of books. Too many. Who needs all these earthly possessions? But, whatever. Have a good night, Dr. DeAngles. Have a good night, Slimy Ducks. Have a good night, Angel Cakes. Have a bad night, Sabian. You're a real piece of work, Sabian. I hope you have a bad night. And if I missed anybody, Mr. Beast, if you're still here. Mr. Beast is in chat. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for joining me for this wonderful stream, even though Marianne didn't have such a good time. Hopefully, see you all tomorrow for a Christmas Carol. Charles Dickens. Night, everybody.